if you guys are ready for it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yes.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, let's get to some calls here. I want to get to first David in New Jersey. David has studied Buddhism, and he has some questions for you guys about it. David, what's going on?
Dan, nice to be back with you again.
Yes. Thanks for calling in again, David.
Okay. Now, I studied Buddhism and started in college. I had a class in comparative religions. And of course, we had to study classic Buddhism. I did my report on the Eightfold Path and later the concept of nirvana. And of course, if I had to define Buddhism, what it is distinct from other things, I would say it's a belief in reincarnation. So I'm going to assume that you believe in reincarnation.
That's a great question.
So do you believe, Nicole, that you believe in reincarnation?
So that's a really good question. I feel like before I even practiced Buddhism, I sort of believed in the idea of reincarnation, maybe more than I believed in the idea of like heaven or hell. I would say that on a personal level, as someone with an agnostic background, I still question everything. So like, I think
you know why?
Now,
do you know why people believe? Do you know why people believe that you reincarnate?
Do I what? Sorry.
Hello? Do you know why there is this belief that everybody reincarnates? Because
do you
know why?
Do I know why there's that belief?
Yes, I'll tell you why. Classically, as we're speaking, it's that every soul or spirit is eternal. And this eternal spirit or soul of a person just comes back in another body.
Well, yeah, I mean, there definitely obviously is a history of that idea, but to Nicole and David's credit, I'm gonna because they are the Buddhists here, I'm gonna assume they know what they're talking about with their own kind of religious practice, right? I think you definitely see a lot more of that in Hinduism compared to Buddhism, I find as well. I think there's a stronger emphasis on reincarnation in a lot of Hindu sects. I could be wrong about that, but and correct me if I'm wrong, David and Nicole, but I think there's a lot of secular Buddhist practices that really don't have a lot of any kind of talk about reincarnation or any of kind of the mythology that comes with some Hinduism and Buddhism and stuff that comes with kind of the background to a lot of this. A lot of these practices can be fairly secular, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is talk about reincarnation, but I think like the important thing to me is not the idea of reincarnation so much, because some Buddhist sects will say like, okay, you have all this karma accumulated from your past lifetimes, right? And you basically have to work lifetime after lifetime after lifetime to undo all of whatever negative karma you've accumulated. Whereas this practice is like, you don't need to do that. This is not about like setting yourself up for your next lifetime. This is about what can you do here and now in this lifetime. So to me, that's the difference. And yes, there is study material that talks about reincarnation. And to some people, it might be more important than others. Personally, to me, it's not as important as like what we're doing in our time on Earth right now, in this lifetime. So
am I still on?
Yeah, you're still on, David.
Okay, then here's what I'm going to say. Buddhism has to be what it is and not something else. It has to be about reincarnation and karma, as you rightly stated, and it has to be about the eternity of the soul.
Why?
And then nirvana figures into that. And if
Why,
you don't
David?
have those factors, then you're not Buddhist. Buddhism is that. It can't be something else.
Whoa, that's a very dogmatic take you're taking there, David. What about those three things you mentioned? Nirvana, reincarnation, and I think karma was the other one. Like, why do you have to have those three things to be Buddhist?
Because that's Buddhism.
So I think here's what's kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of yeah, but here's the thing. Yeah, there's a lot of different sects of Buddhism though, right? And this is sort of like, so the Lotus Sutra were teachings from the original Shakyamuni Buddha. If you study, the origin of Buddhism, it's from later on in his life. So this is kind of like after all that, right? There's all these teachings that came out before that we don't necessarily focus on. But I don't think that Buddhism is necessarily boiled down to just reincarnation and karma and souls. I mean, we don't even talk about souls,
Yeah, if I could just say something, I had a really interesting experience at one of our district meetings where this issue came up of reincarnation. One member said, "I can't believe in reincarnation. That doesn't make any logical sense to me." And another member said, "Well, by reincarnation, maybe what the meaning behind it isn't a strict, well, you die and you turn into another person, but more of along the lines of the actions of lives before you were alive affect you today, affect you going forward." And that's my interpretation of when it comes to reincarnation. I think about the fact that my Jewish ancestors had to undergo so many different obstacles and challenges because of their faith, and that has subconsciously and consciously affected me today. And even though it's not the classical reincarnation that's being taught in colleges and in universities, it's an interpretation of reincarnation that really aligns, I think, with the philosophy of Nichiren Buddhism, that is the mystic law of cause and effect, where one cause in the past affects the future, and a cause in the present is all that we can focus on making.
Can you hear me? I would say that now, do you also understand that most people along this line of thought, we call them Hindus, obviously there's a distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism. I've got the Book of Miracles, I've got the Kabbalah, which is a Jewish form that incorporates pantheistic belief, which this is. Buddhism is part of what we call the pantheistic beliefs. Now, would it surprise you if I said to you that it is an irrational belief system? It's not a rational base belief.
Pantheistic beliefs are irrational? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's why. Because whenever you call your belief is what you make it to be, and it doesn't have to be what anybody else believes it to be, already you've defied a law of definition, the rule of rational thought, which is a thing is what it is. That you have to have a definite defining of what a thing is. Buddhism is what you ever make it.
Wait a minute, David. Time out. We got to talk about this. People make up definitions of words all the time. People are what make the things mean the things. Like, you can't just say they can't identify as Buddhist because they don't agree with your definition of Buddhism. Like, obviously they have some differences in what you would call a classical Buddhist might believe. But to reject one's identity because they don't fit into your classical definition, I mean, I don't see any reason for that outside of just preference.
Well, what I'm saying is that when you can self-identify what anything is, and you can't have an agreement upon what a thing is, then you've lost the first law of rational thought, which is we have to agree what a thing is. If we can't agree what a thing is, then we never know what the thing is we're talking about. It's what it is to you versus what it is to me. And that's complete relativism, where we can't even communicate because we have to understand
as long as you know what somebody else is talking about, David, as long as you know what they mean when they use their definition of a word, then why does it matter?
Well, but then the definition of what classical Buddhism is no longer classical Buddhism. It's their idea of Buddhism.
No. The classical definition would stay the classical definition. They never said they were classical Buddhists. They practice a particular form of Buddhism.
No, but they still carry the basic understanding of pantheistic thought, which is not rationally based.
Well, they obviously don't. They
long-
just said that they don't. So I don't know how you could assert that.
Exactly. Because there's this idea that when everything is God, then it's the classical understanding of Buddhism, or even other people have this in relation. It's I am God. I am eternal soul. I have an eternal soul. Now that's classic and that's important. And when the question is, how do you know you are God or you are Brahma? Whoever knows thus I am Brahma becomes this all. The question is, that is knowable only through intuition. And all the people who I've talked to, I did 3 years of debate on this in Washington Square Park, in the park itself. And I had somebody draw a line and said, your problem is, Dave, you believe in rational thought, all these rules. He said, and that doesn't help you. I said, what you need is to have this intuitive, and he drew the line vertically. You can't, in other words, you can't think, you have to think intuitively and not vertically. Understand that you are God, because that's an intuition. Who knows thus I am Brahma? And he who has this self-realization, and you know what I said back to him? I said, notice now you...
We're kind of going on a tangent here. I kind of want to go ahead and stop this.
I'm almost
I don't know if we're getting... I don't know if we're getting to where I want to get to with this call in particular, but I think we went ahead and answered your questions already, David. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go now. But thanks again for calling in and giving your thoughts on Buddhism and stuff. I do appreciate the call. However, I just want to give a warning to anybody who wants to talk. Maybe let's not dismiss the religious identities of my guests. Okay, just kind of as a rule in the future, because if they say that they're Buddhists and they say that they're Christians, that's who they are. And, we can talk about what exactly that means, but I don't want to dismiss people offhand because we have some other definition for what we're doing here. Because I'm not a fan of that. So, so there's obviously different schools of thought when it comes to Buddhism, and there's different overlapping and sometimes unrelated ideas. But if you look at the history of Christianity, I mean, there are people 1,000, 2,000 years ago who would call themselves Christians that would be completely unrecognizable to us in their beliefs. So religious ideas develop and evolve over time. That's nothing new. I mean, I guess the only reason I could say, maybe if you said, oh, I don't even think Jesus Christ is real, then yeah, maybe you could never call yourself a Christian by that, but you could still follow the teachings written down or something. There's lots of ways we can work with these words. So I don't know if I like David's take on you have to be this one way. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's identifying is that he has this preset idea of what Buddhism is from what he's studied. And that's totally valid. He's done academic study on Buddhism and the history of Buddhism and Eastern religions. And I've never taken a class like that. So that's fair. All I can tell you is what I practice from my own experience and my own perspective, right? And same with David. And just like we have our own individual experiences practicing this form of Buddhism, there are many, many other people out there, over 12 million people who have their own individual experiences with it too. And I mean, if you don't want to call it Buddhism, I guess that's up to you. I would differ with that because that's what it's been called ever since I started practicing it. So it's honestly, I feel like it's a more modern form of Buddhism and a lot of people aren't really familiar with it. So I can understand that sort of hesitancy to want to accept it as Buddhism because it doesn't align with your previous understanding of what that is. So
yeah, and I would just add on to that, there are no Buddhist priests in our organization. It's all members. It's a lay organization, like Nicole said. So there's no a priesthood that we're paying a tariff to, and that's very unorthodox when it comes to Buddhist organizations. So even within Buddhism, there's a lot of these conversations about, well, what is Buddhism? What isn't Buddhism? And I think, that debate really doesn't get to the crux of what I find is the most valuable piece of religion and Buddhism specifically, which is making improvements in our lives, making improvements in our communities, making the world a better place to be in.
Yeah, and you know, Nicole, I like that you gave David credit because there is an academic study to Buddhism, obviously, that dates back, centuries, and like it's not like the conversation of what is Buddhism hasn't been like controversial to people at different points in times.
Right.
But I think I'm going to err on the side of the active practitioners who are coming representative of an organization are probably going to know more than someone who's studied it in college. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I think I want people to freely express and give their identities how they want to give. I'm not going to, we can talk about the legitimacy of some of those ideas, but that's different from denying somebody's identity. So I think that's something I want to just kind of create as a precedent going forward, especially